This
You can catch
conference will now be
the
recorded.
specific exception. The possibility of getting the exceptions are either it can be generic or either it can be specific. But remember, you should always use specific exceptions only, unless and until there's a possibility of getting a lot of exceptions in your piece of code and you don't know what can be caught, then only you need to go with generic exception. If you want to write generic exception, simply remove these brackets and exception : error. Okay, done. Now I want to ask you one question. I wrote int I equal to 10. Is there a possibility of getting exception when this statement gets executed or not? Is there a possibility of getting exception?
No.
No. Then do we need to write try and catch? Is it necessary? Is it necessary to write try
No,
and
I
catch?
guess.
Okay. Now let's say. Now I want to create one method. I will say public void calculate, or you can take public real calculate, and inside the brackets I will take, let's say, two values, real a comma real b. Okay, I am writing a new method here. Okay, and I want to call this as a static method, because if it is a static method I can call directly without creating any instance. Okay, now what I will do is I will say return a by b, and then inside the try what I will do is I will say real value equal to, we have AMA exception handling. To call the static method we need to use calc, and then you can say 10 comma 5. Is there a possibility of getting exception in this code? Do we need to try and catch or not? Do we need to try and catch or not?
No.
No? Oh, okay. Now what do you think? Do you think
Yes.
we do
Yes,
need to
we
write?
need to write.
So
Yes.
remember,
Yes.
whenever you are trying to make a function calls and the values are unpredictable, okay, if you can predict the values, then there is no need of writing the exception handling here. If it is unpredictable, then what you need to do? You need to use exception handling. Okay, why we need to use exception handling? Because the system will always throw a generic error. Okay, the system will always throw a generic error. Okay, let me show you. Let me take catch, and then I will say exception : I don't know if it reaches this. So where is divided by 0 error? No. Okay, they have not given the divided by 0 error, so mostly it should go to the error. Okay, now what I will do is I will say info and then exception : error. Or here I am writing info. Info means informative message. If you want to add error, you need to use error. Simple. Okay, you need to use error. And similarly, if you are trying to catch a CLR exception, then whatever you need to do is you need to use error AFUtil. In this you have a method called get CLR error message. Okay, so 90% of the times you will get exception out of it, but remaining 10% you will not get the exception for CLR errors. At that point what we will do is we will use, let me write it here itself. Okay, you can say system.exception ex equal to, and you have something called CLR interop class. Here you will have get last exception. You can also use this. Okay, and I will use info here because if I write error now it will break. Okay, and then I will say ex dot to string. Okay, here you will have the inner exception and a lot of things here. If you want to catch all those, you can do that. Okay, so this is how we are going to work with exceptions. Okay, So here, if you want to continue after the error, you can simply say info. If you use info, na, it will continue. And here I will say throw exception colon, you have CLR error. I will use CLR error and I will throw it. We can see two different types of errors now. Okay. And similarly, if you think the generic is there is a possibility of generic exception, you can simply use catch and you can simply say either error, and then you can say please contact system administrator. Okay. And if you want to give the exception message, you can just add the exception message over there. Okay. Done. Now see here, this is about exception handling, and I told you there is a possibility of retry. So I'm using the info here. What I can do, I can simply say retry after the info. What it will do, throw exception colon CLR error. I got the error, retry. Again it will come back to try. It will execute the statements. Again it will come back. It will execute. Again it will come back. It will execute. Okay. Oh, sorry. Here it should not be CLR error. My bad. It should be error. And retry should not be taken here. Okay. Here as well. Let me use info. Okay. Please remember, I'm using info because I want it to continue. If you want to throw the error, then you need to simply use error. And if you want to show the warning message, then you need to use warning like that. Okay. Now see here, it will come exception colon CLR error. Good. Retry. Again it will try. Again it will try. It will do this for infinite times. So whenever you are working with a retry, what is the criteria? That retry should be conditional. So I will take a value int I equal to 1. Okay. So don't use this kind of variables I, j, k. Okay. As I'm taking the sessions, I'm using it. But in real time, you need to say retry count. You need to use like this. Okay. And then here you need to simply write if retry count is less than or equal to 5. I'm asking you to try for 5 times. And I need to say retry count plus plus and then close. Now what it will do? For 5 times it will retry. After that, it will not. Okay. Here it is throwing some error here. Let's see. Type mismatch in the info argument. Okay. So what you can do is let's take str fmt and then %1 comma done. Okay, one error should be gone. Now here I also what I need to do. Let me try str fmt and then %1 comma done. Okay. Now let's add the breakpoints and let's see how it is working. Okay. Whether my retry and exceptions are working fine or not. Let's see this. Oh, what is this here? It's saying we are missing semicolon. Done. I have added it. Good. Now let me go to Solution Explorer and let me set this exception handling as the startup object. Run. Oh, 1 second. I think I have used it once it comes back. Sorry. Okay. Run. Let's wait for a minute. For the first time, it will take some time. We need to wait.
Meanwhile, I just want to check with the group. Anybody able to, set up the AX, that VST file or Hyper-V, something like that?
Okay, you can ping that. Now you can see here, we got the breakpoint hit. Okay, uh, just a second. I think it's taking more time. Yeah, in the meantime, you can ping here. Kamal, are you facing any issues while setting up the VM?
Yeah, it was showing me. It was showing me some error that there is no OS in this particular drive, something like that.
Oh, okay. Oh, you have pinged it. I think if you try to boot, that would be great.
This is what you suggested. I will try that.
Yeah, because setting up the VM is very simple. In front of you only, that's why I have set it up. You need to
Yes,
use
yes.
do the same procedure. There is no difference. Okay.
But how it is showing me that there is no OS in this particular drive? Because I'm trying to set up that VM into D drive.
That I don't know, yeah. Frankly speaking, because unless and until I see inside your system, I can't do anything. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Now see here, it has hit the breakpoint. Now let me press F11. It will go to the method. F10. It is running A by B. It has 10 by 0. What it has done? Okay, it came back again. F10. Now it went into the CLR error. It is running the CLR exception. And then ex.toString. It is printing the exception. Now what will happen is, frankly speaking, you can see it says divide by 0 exception. Okay. Now, if you say divided by 0 exception, you and me can understand very easily. Do you agree that? Because we know what is it and from where it can be caught. Whereas, what about the end user? What he will feel? Hey, what is this tag trace? Yeah, what is this decimal and application.ama except what are all these things? This is what he feels. So whenever you're trying whenever you're using the exception handling, here the meaning is that you would like to throw some meaningful values, meaningful error messages instead of generic exceptions. Okay, instead of throwing the exception, directly, what you will do is you will try to show some meaningful error message. If you want to show that kind of meaningful error messages, then what you need to do here, you should not print ex.toString. Instead of that, you need to say error. Let's say if it is a quantity, you need to say the value of quantity is incorrect. Okay. Let's say if the error message is due to some other value, then what you need to say? You need to say the exception is caused due to this thing. This is how you need to decide. Okay. So please remember, whenever you are trying to throw the exceptions, okay, whenever you are trying to throw the exceptions, just a second. Okay, this is how you need to plan. Okay, instead of showing the generic error messages, don't ever throw generic exceptions. Okay, always try to catch the type of exception and then throw some meaningful value. I am not throwing a meaningful error message here. I am simply saying divided by 0. It should not be divided by 0. You should take at least two values and then you need to throw the exception. And one more thing, I told you that this AIF util colon colon get CLR error message will not work few times. You can see now it has printed blank. Okay, if it is a throwing from the CIL from the .NET framework, it will simply not show that error message. Okay, now I am trying to do a retry. Let's see, less than 5. Now retry count is 2. Let's see, it is again going to the try. It is again catching throwing the exception. It will again come back same. Okay, this is the purpose of retry. So when you will use retry, when you will use retry, if it is divided by 0, if it is divided by 0, there is no need of doing a retry here. Instead of using a retry, you can simply throw the error message. If you're trying to connect to some third-party service, if you are trying to connect to some third-party service, then whatever you need to do is you need to use retry, because due to connectivity issue, for the first time if it gets failed, instead of throwing the error directly, you need to do a retry and then you need to connect back. Okay, please remember, this is one more thing that you need to remember. Okay, next, inside the catch, what you can do, you can throw the informative message, you can throw the error, you can show the warning. Depending upon the requirement, you need to decide whether to throw the informative message. Let's say here even then you got the exception that is not a valid and you can continue with that exception, then you need to throw the informative message. Let's say if it is a there is some issue with the data and you are truncating the data, you need to throw the warning. Third one, let's say if due to the scenario you need to block the execution of the code further, then you need to throw the error message. Okay, this is how we need to decide, and this is about the exception handling. Okay, yeah, please let me know if you have any questions in exception handling. If there are no queries, I will move to the next topic. Okay, I want to call this as constants macros. Okay, no questions? Okay, good. I will call this as AMA constants macros. Okay, and then click on the add button. Now see here, whenever I say constant, so what are these constants? Let's say for example we have a value called pi. The value of pi is 3.14. okay, the value of pi is 3.14 and it will be same everywhere in your code. Okay, so like this, if you have any constants values, for example let's say there is a variable called path. Okay, this path will be constant and it might be to your code or it might be to your AOT or whatever it is. Okay, and similarly let's say you have something called a third party URI. This can be a constant value. So how to store these constants and where to store these constants, how to work with them? To work with these constants, there are two different ways. Okay, in Dynamics 365, one is by using macros, the second one is by using there is a keyword called const. Okay, this keyword is introduced in Dynamics 365. We can use this const keyword and then we can create the constants. We can create the constants. Okay, so these are the two things that we can do. Now first of all, let's see macros. Coming to these macros, these are divided into again different types. The first type of macro is called inline macro. The second type of macro is called local macro. The third type of macro is called global macro. Okay. Now, what is a macro? A macro is nothing but a fragment of code which has given a name. Okay. If a macro is nothing but a small fragment of code which has given a name. Okay. Now, wherever you use this macro, the contents of the macro will be replaced at that position. For example, to use the macro, you need to use hash, define, and then you need to use dot. For example, let's say we have a variable called path, and here I want to add some path. Okay, let me go to some drive. Let me take this downloads. Right click on the copy as path, and then you can paste it over here. I am using at the rate. Okay, due to the slash. Otherwise, I need to add double slash. Okay, if you don't want to add double slash, you need to use at the rate. Next, I have defined the path. Similarly, what I can do, I can use hash define dot py, and in the bracket I will say 3.14. Okay. Now, how to use this macros? Okay. For example, let's say I want to declare a variable, or I want to use a path in a variable. Let's say I can say path equal to hash path. Let's see whether it works or not. And similarly, I want to take real pi equal to hash pi. Okay, while doing the multiplication or anywhere you can use this. Okay, now let me save this. Good, it has not thrown any error. So what do we call these macros? These are called inline macros. Inline means in the same line. You are going to write the code in the same line. And now if I write inline macros here, this is a main method. The scope of the inline macro is to the method, or it can be to the class. Suppose let's say you define a macro here, hash define dot, and then you will say something, and if you write 1 2 3 4, okay, the scope of this macro will be to the entire class. In all the methods of this class you can use this macro. Okay, let me do that. I can say simply info, and then I can say strfmt %1 hyphen %2 hyphen %3 comma. If you want to print directly using macro, you can use macro. If you want to use your variable, you can use your variable. Okay, like this you can do. Okay, so this is how we will work with inline macro. And the second type of macro is called local macro. So what is a local macro? Let's say you have multiple lines of code you want to use in a macro. You have multiple lines of code you want to use in a macro. Then we will go for local macro. Okay, then we will go for local macro. So how to use local macro? Let's try hash local macro dot. I want to call this as add because I want to perform the addition operation. I will say C. Okay, let me do one thing. Let me declare some variables. Int a comma b comma, let me take some value. Okay, and then I will say some value equal to a plus b, and I want to print some informative message, addition completed. Okay, done. And I will say hash and macro. Okay, I don't know whether this works in D365 or not, but let's try local macro dot add. Okay, in this version we will see if there are any errors. We will see. Okay, next, this is about a local macro, and there is one more way here. You can do hash macro dot, I can say some feed list, and then I can add the values, country, city, zip code. Okay, country, city, zip code, and then I will say hash and macro. Done. Okay, save. So this is how we will work with local macros. Now if I write select, or I need to declare the table buffer. One second. AMA address, and then select hash field list from address. Done. We got it. This is how you can use a local macro. Similarly, if you want to perform the addition, what you can do, you can say hash addition inside the bracket. Okay, I don't want to add A and B. I want to pass the variables. If you want to pass the variables, you can say %1, %2. So I am passing two variables. So I will say 12, 23, and then info strfmt %1, some value. Done. This is how we need to work. Got it? This is about a local macro and inline macro. But please remember, if you want to use local macro or inline macro in your code, you need to sacrifice performance, because there is a difference. Okay, how the programming language will treat macros and how the programming language will treat constants or variables, there is a difference. If you are creating a variable, it will be directly stored in the memory. If you are creating a macro, it will be in the file itself. Whenever the code comes across that macro, it will go to the file, it will read the file, it will get the value of the macro, it will place it over there. Now I want to ask you one question. The operations are two different types: memory operations, disk operations. Which will be faster, memory or disk?
Memory.
Memory, because if everything is loaded into the RAM, the application will run faster. If it is not loaded into the RAM, the application will run slower. So automatically what will happen? If you are using macros, you need to sacrifice the performance. Okay, so in this kind of cases, let's say you have a path. Instead of creating a macro, what we can do, we can create something called constants. We have a keyword called const, and then you can say str path equal to this one. Now what will happen? The variable, this will get stored inside the
Memory.
RAM memory. So as it stores inside the memory, it will be able to fetch the value faster. So whenever you are working, please do remember that you should use constants instead of inline macros. Okay, and local macros, I suggest they will be very rarely used. Instead of creating a local macro, you can create one method. So what you need to remember is, never try to use a local macro. Instead of that, try to use a method. Okay, now I told you there are one more type of macros. What are those? Global macros or AOT macros. Okay, right click on the project, click on the add button, new item. Here you can see something called macro. So whatever I will do is, I will call this as AMA macro. Okay, so now if you are creating a macro in this fashion, you will call this as AOT macros. Again, in the AOT, you can add your local macro, you can add your global macro. Okay, if you add your inline or local macro into the AOT macro, it will become a global macro. Okay, suppose if you add this piece of code, this field list, into the AMA macro, AOT macro, that will become global macro. The global macros can be used across the AOT. Okay, instead of calling this as pi, I will call it as PIGL. Okay, to indicate this as a global macro. Okay, Let me save this. Let me come back to the macros. If you want to use a global macro in your code, okay? If you want to use a global macro in your code, we have macro library. Okay, all the macros will get added to the macro library, and then you can use dot and you can give the name of the macro, AMA macro. Okay, so I will add it at the beginning. Okay, if you are adding it at the beginning, you can use in the entire method. Okay, a local variable named path. Okay, I will say path local. Done. Okay, AMA macro. Now what I can do is I can say info and strfmt percentile1 comma hash pigl. Done. This is the global macro. Okay, so this is about macros and constants. So please be careful whenever you are working with macros and constants. Why? If you are working with macros, you need to sacrifice the performance. Unless and until you have a constant which you are using in multiple places, okay, not 2 or 3 places, you are using it in hundreds of places in the AOT, then go and define a global macro. Okay, but don't define the global macro if it is not the requirement to use it in multiple places. If you want to define it in 2 or 3 places, now use constant here, because it will be faster, the code will run faster. Okay, please remember, this is on the performance point of view. Now let's do one thing. Let's start working with the code, and remember, once you define the constant, you can't modify this later on the code. Okay, later on in the code, once you define the constant, you can't modify the constant later on in your code. Okay, now I'm adding a breakpoint here. I'll go to solution explorer. I will set this as the startup object and run.
Kumar, meanwhile, just wanted to check the word call hash local macro is the keyword, or just putting hash it become a keyword.
It's the keyword. Local macro or macro is the keyword. Okay,
Uh-huh.
okay, now it has hit the breakpoint. Let me press F10. Okay, you can see here how it is working. This will print the values 3.141234 and path. Here it is the field list. It took the field list, add It has added the values. And this is our global macro. This is how we are need to work with macros. Okay, and then constants. Okay, but please remember the local macro and inline macros. Please avoid using them. Okay, because there will be a lot of performance drawback with them. Okay, in AX 2012, in AX 2012, in there are few parts which are very slow. Okay, for example, inventory. As the data gets increased, it will be very slow. Okay, so the reason for introducing this constant keyword is to avoid macros. Okay, the reason for introducing that const keyword is to avoid macros. So please try to avoid using macros as much as you can. Okay, now the next step. This is about the constants, macros, and then exception handling. Now we will start a very new concept. Okay, and this time I would like to start with the classes. Now we know about runnable class, we know about macro. I will start with the class now. So what is a class? Okay, now I want to create a class for arithmetic operations. What is a class? What is a class? A class is a collection of data and method. What is a class? A class is a collection of data and method. Okay, so what is data? Data is used to represent state of the object. What is the method? The method is used to represent the behavior of the object. Okay, data is used to represent the state of the object and the method is used to represent behavior of the object. Okay, now coming towards programming languages. Okay, you might have heard two words. One is structured programming language. C is a structured programming language. Object oriented programming language. What is object orientation? If you combine the data and method together, it will create a class. If you create the instance of a class, it will create a object. Okay, if you create the instance of that class, it will create a object. Class is not going to hold the memory. Object will have the memory. Okay, class will not have the memory. Object will have the memory. And inside the object, you will have the data and methods. Okay, if you have the data and methods or the code and data bind together into one, we will call it as a encapsulation. Okay, when code and data are linked together in this fashion or bound together in this fashion, an object is created and we will call it as encapsulation. Encapsulation is the mechanism of binding code and data together. Okay, code and data together. Okay, now X++ is also a object oriented programming language. Okay, so someone unmuted. Any queries? Okay, so what is encapsulation? The mechanism that binds the code and data together is called encapsulation. Okay, so why we have this here again, encapsulation? Okay, we are binding the code and data together to keep them safe and there should not be outside interference. There should not be any interference, which is why we are binding code and data together. Okay, we are binding code and data together. Okay, and the next one is, if I say object orientation, most of the times people will say a few concepts. Object orientation, first one is encapsulation. We know what is encapsulation. Second one is
Returns.
Inheritance. What is inheritance? Inheritance is the process. What is the type of process? If you want to acquire, if one object acquires the properties of another object, we will say the process as inheritance. And inheritance is supported in Dynamics 365 or X++. And the last one is called polymorphism. Okay, these are the three things that will come into our mind when we speak about object orientation. Polymorphism is also supported here. Okay, what is polymorphism? We have a concept called specialization and generalization. Okay, specialization and generalization. Specialization and generalization is achieved by using polymorphism. Okay, specialization and generalization is achieved by using polymorphism. Okay, whereas if you are using inheritance, association is achieved by using inheritance. Okay, so now this is how we create a class, and then this is how we are going to work with the object orientation. Okay, so actually I plan to discuss, but let's do one thing. I want to break here because I think few of the people have not yet set up VM. So we will see what is a class. Now we know what is a class. Now we will see what are the default methods of the class, what is a constructor, what is a destructor, what are parameters and everything. Okay, yeah, now it's your time. Please let me know if you have any queries. If there are no queries, I will end the session here.
Kumar,
Yes, Kamal, go ahead.
okay, sorry. I could not get that hash then add you use in that macro, and then you pass the value, and it was then passed to some function like that.
Where exactly? This
Uh,
one?
no, this is add function. Then you call downside after the AMA address. Yeah.
Here. See
Okay.
here. I am using this add as a function. Okay, this is like just like a local function. I have created to %1, %2 means variables. Now I have passed the data of the two variables here, and once I pass the data of two variables here, it will calculate the sum and then it will put it here. Got it?
But how this value will be going to this some
%1, %2, yeah. If you are using %1, you are saying this is a variable which I need to pass. If you don't pass, by default it will take the 0.
that's that's a little bit confusing. Okay, it's okay.
Because if you want to debug you
what
can't debug
happens? Then only what happens? We'll write function name, then we'll pass the variable, the parameter inside the function.
Here as well I have done the same thing. Add. Okay, this add is similar to the function, and inside that I have two %1 and %2. I have passed the two variables. It is similar to parameters.
Kumar, the next line, info strfmt %1, how that line works, I mean the output, I would have missed from previous classes.
Sorry, come again.
The next line, the output line, info and %1,
okay.
how does that work? Maybe I have missed.
See here, inside the info I'm using string format because sum v is a integer type. I need to print the integer type. Okay,
right.
So I have only one variable, so I have used %1. If I'm using %1, I am saying that I have one variable after this which I want to print. If I say %1, 2, 3, 4 like that, that means %1, %2, depending upon the number of variables, you will use that many specifiers here. Okay.
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
Invalidate enumerators or iterators after changing elements. What is this concept about collection classes? Where did you see that?
In MSCN, I was going through the concept of
Can you ping that link?
class. Okay.
Hi, Kumar.
Yep.
What is actually a macro? Is it a kind of function or method itself?
If you want to define if you want to define a function, constant, then you will use macro to define a function. Okay.
Only for a constant?
Sorry, not for a function, constant. Okay, to define a constant. Okay, if you want to define any constant, then we are going to use a macro. Okay, but coming to this macro, as I told you, there is a performance drawback. So we need to avoid using macros and we need to use constants by using the const keyword.
Okay, but if it is a global macro also, so it is a kind of function again, and then
No, it's not a function. It's a constant. It's a hard-coded constant here. It's
yes,
a
it is a
hard-coded constant.
but what is the functionality of this macro in the future? Like we are going to write some technique in that, some logic in that.
This is what there is no logic. Okay, the macro, in the macro, whatever you write, it will get replaced wherever you use it. Okay, there is no logic for a macro. It's a hard-coded value. Okay, now I told hash define pi this value. Whenever I say hash pi, what will happen? The value 3.14 will be replaced here. The macro will be replaced with a fragment of code that you add for it. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, this I think already I told you. So what will happen is now okay, here you have the map. Okay, I have created the map enumerator at this position, and let's say after this I am adding one more value to the map enumeration and try to fetch it. What will happen? What will happen? What will happen? Will I get that value? No, because whenever I get the map enumerator, there itself I will have the all values of the map. After this, even if you add the values to the map and if you try to get it now, you will not get those values and it will simply throw the error. It will simply throw the error. So what he's saying is, if you want to get the values, you need to use the map enumerator properly. Okay, and let's say you got the values. After that as well you want to use them, then you need to invalidate, means you need to clear this map enumerator, and then again you need to reinitialize in the next position where you want all the values of the map. Okay, because if you add values after this map enumerator to the map, then you will have that issue. Okay, otherwise you will not have this. Whenever you are trying to use the map enumerator, one point you need to remember is, after this you are not going to add values to this map. Okay, which is why I have added this at the end. Okay, yeah. Next, any other queries? Okay, if there are no queries, I will end session for everyone. Thanks all for the session. Let's meet again tomorrow same time. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, Kumar. Bye bye.